Namaskaram and Jai Hind, folks. As promised, we would like to have an introduction to the kumbhmél, which is coming up. Why kumbhmél? Well, there are so many videos. It's actually a flood out there. I've been trying to search for some with a deeper spiritual meaning and have found it very, very tough to find videos which really give you the intuition into what it really is. So I thought, if there is none, why not make one? And here we are. I will use the FreeForm app on the Apple iPad so that what I'm talking about becomes a little clear. So what we are going to be talking about is, of course, the kumbhmél. In Hindi, the A of the Sanskrit gets dropped out and you just say kumbhmél. But whatever it is, this is essentially a kalash or a water pot or a gada in Hindi, pane in Tamil, whatever it is. There is something more to it because we know this is a very auspicious symbol in sanātana dharma. Bharat, of course, cannot be separated from sanātana dharma. They are absolutely inseparable from each other. One means the other, in fact. Because the real meaning of Bharat is bhā, knowledge or intelligence, and rat, spreading that out, that infinite knowledge to anyone who cares for it. Sanātana, of course, is eternal, and dharma has many connotations, but in the sense that we will be talking about here is the duty. By the very nature or the characteristic of a particular entity, we say it's dharma. Kumbh, for example, you would know in South India, the gopurams of the temples, you typically do what is known as a kumbhāṣṭakam. The kumbhāṣṭakam is done at a certain regular interval where the pots which are kept at the top of the gopurams are re-sanctified or consecrated. Also, when some great people come, especially saints or great leaders, statesmen like Prime Minister Modi ji or Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath ji, then we welcome them with a purna kumbh. That means a full kumbh. All of these you could probably gather from your own erstwhile knowledge, parents or grandparents, and many of the videos as well. What I am going to be talking about is the real meaning of that kumbh. That kumbh actually refers to the panchakoshas, the 5 wrappers that we are all made out of. Yes, you heard me right. What we're talking about is actually a human being, right? So now if you're talking about a human being, most people think or identify with that person's physicality, which is essentially what we call as the physical body. The body is qualified with physical because according to Yoga Shastra in Sanatana Dharma, there are multiple bodies that we are made out of. Apart from this physical body, we have what is known as an emotional body, which we can think of. This is the physical body. Then we have enveloping it, the focus at the region between the eyebrows is what we call as the emotional body. Then we have what is known as the intellectual body. And these 3 put together is what I've been referring to in a lot of my talks and also articles on katham.in as the BMI, because this is the emotional mind, is your sharp intellect, sharp or smart. These days, smart is used more with phones rather than human beings. But essentially, the B of the body, the M of the mind, the I of the intellect, is what I call as the BMI, based on the wonderful chart made famous by Swami Cinmayānandā ji. This is not all, because we have pancha kosha, not just 3 koshas, and the other kosha is your pranic kosha and your anandamaya kosha. Pranamaya kosha and the anandamaya kosha. Okay, so essentially you have these 5 different layers that each one of us is made out of, expanding out, and the final layer is called as the anandamaya kosha or the bliss body. While the one before that, as I just mentioned, is the pranamaya kosha or the vital body. It's essentially what life is all about. The grossest expression of that is what is known as the pranavayu, though you also have the apanavayu, vyanavayu, samanavayu, and the udanavayu as well, apart from the pranavayu, making up the pancha prana. Of course, there are subtle pranas that I made a separate video about a year back. Now, this is the real kalash or water pot or gada that we are talking about, and that's what is the real kumbh. Sanatana Dharma and Yoga Shastra in particular, there's a lot of metaphors that are used. Even other aspects of Sanatana Dharma, like especially Bhadarayana, Krishna Dvaipayana's, Ashtadasha Puranas, if you look at, it's all storytelling. It helps because it gives you a mnemonics, and it helps because even when those are thought of as historical and or, which they are, most of them are historical, sometimes exaggerated, of course, the poetic liberty, but based on real life figures who have existed since ancient times. lamps, this kumbh, for each and every one of us is made out of these 5 layers. And which is why we also have not just this panchakoshas, but also panchaloha, 5 metals which are used to make this gada, water pot or kalash, which we call as the kumbh. So now that we know what is kumbh, we have to look at what is kumbhmél. Therefore, we need to understand the second word, mela, comes from milan or getting together, brainstorming. And that's essentially what happens at a kumbhmél, where many such kumbhs, which are 5-layered pots, coming over there. Now, the kumbh that is famous is the one which Dhanvantari Maharishi is supposed to have brought out of the Parkadal Kadayirde, or what we call as the Samudra Manthan in Hindi and Sanskrit. When that happens, Dhanvantari, apart from many other goodies like Lakshmi, the Halahal Visha, of course, can't think of as a goodie, but that's what made Shiva the Nilakantha that he is, Chandra, and many other things. But what's of significance for us is just that Kalasha which came out, that Kalasha, the Kumbha, and many such Kumbhas coming in. Sadly, most of us, even sādhaks, tend to identify ourselves with one or more of these layers. More often than not, it's with the body, which is the grossest level, and makes it look that we are so small in the spatio-temporal domain. But then as we grow in our sadhana, as our involvement in our sadhana is deeper, we see that we are the mind, emotional mind. Then some more sadhana for some more time, and then we realize we are not even the emotional mind, we are the fiery intellect. Then we go deeper inside ourselves, and then we realize that no, we are the vital life force itself. But not the entire life, but that portion of life that we have occupied or that we have accessed. Now, when we try to go to deeper levels of sadhana, like for example, any one of the 112 techniques taught by Shiva to the Saptarishis and Parvati in the Vijnana Bhairav, very popular in Kashmiri Shaivism, you will see that you go even beyond that and you get to what is known as the Anandamaya Kosha that we see over here. Right? Let me use a different color now. So this is Anandamaya Kosha that we finally think we are. In other words, the bliss body, and therefore that's the final subtlest sheath of the 5 sheaths or wrappers, gift wrappers that we are covered with. Now when that also is opened up, we are Parabrahman. Whether you call it Parabrahman, Brahman, Paramatman or Atman, you're all one and the same. It's just different levels of our evolution in a spiritual sense when we think of it in these different forms, whereas all 4 of these are formless in reality. And it's just an indication even with these names. But of course, Sanskrit and the Vedic language in particular, the vibes are such that the form and the sound, which is the name, are so much in sync with each other that they resonate with each other. And that's the best that you can get, because this, as Guru Dakshinamurti taught, can be transmitted only through silence. But the next best to silence is the Vedic chants, and the next best is Sanskrit, and then the primary derivatives of Sanskrit, which is all of our regional languages in Bharat, and then the secondary derivatives of Sanskrit, which is every language and dialect of the whole world. At a distant level, they are of a parentage from Sanskrit and Tamil. Now, let's get back to what we are doing. Within the Anandamaya Kosha, we said it's the Parabrahman, and that is universal beyond the spatio-temporal boundaries. Because it is beyond the spatial boundaries, we call it omnipresent, and because it's beyond the temporal boundaries, we call it eternal. And it is the realization of that which is the purpose of the kumbhmél. So now you have understood the kumbhmél concept from the typical questions that I ask even when I teach engineering courses is what is it? Now we also know why it is important, because we want to go from the wrong identification that we have made about ourselves to the true identification in steps, and not just in an intellectual sense but in an experiential sense. And that's possible only through satsang, which happens in the kumbhmél. So now that we have answered this what and why, the next 2 questions that I would like to answer are where and when. Finally, we will also look at the most important thing, which is how. Katham. Let's look at the question of where this happens. In the physical world, based on the Puranic Kathas, we are talking about these 4 places. What I'm doing is what I like to call, borrowing from a mathematical terminology, a conformal mapping from the physical to the metaphysical. And that's what you see here in terms of 4 places that you're familiar with, and one that very few of you, perhaps only Bengalis, and that too very few Bengalis as well, would be familiar with. We'll go to the fifth one later. But if you look at the path that it takes, it's really beautiful. You see that you're traveling from point number 1 over here, which is Nashik, Triambakeshwara, on the banks of Godavari, which is likened to be an avatar of Ganga, to Ujjaini, which is mark number 2 or A over here. Of course, it's also known by its more ancient name, Avantika. Trikal Mahakal or Mahakaleshwar's temple is over there. And then we have the third place, which is Haridwar. Hari means to kidnap or to hijack or to steal. Steal what? Our wrong identities, so that we recognize Prajnanam Brahma, Tattvamasi, Ayam Atma Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi. The 4 great Mahavakyas from 4 of the 12 principal Upanishads, which are the Vedanta or the culmination or the takeaways of the Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharvana Vedas. That's the third one. And then we have the fourth one, which is now of significance, which is Prayagraj. And finally, the fifth one, which is Bāṃ-sa-béri-yā in West Bengal. Now, what really is happening over here? If you look at Nashik, Ujjaini and Haridwar, and the reason why I've numbered them as 1, 2, 3 is essentially the cycle in which this happens. We will, of course, look at it when we are looking at the next question, which is when, but right now we are focusing on where, right? So these are the 5 places. If you look at the first 3 places, they are pretty much in a straight line. The path that I have drawn is the walking path, as Google indicates. If you were able to walk from Nashik to Ujjain to Haridwar, it's pretty much a straight line. What really is happening is that we are moving from the Mooladhara to the Manipura over here. Those of you who are familiar with the 7 major chakras will think that I forgot something and skipped something. No, I did not. Because Nashik is representative of the Bhuloka, whereas Ujjaini is representative of the Swargaloka. And in between, you have the space between these 2 lokas or 2 dimensions or 2 ways of perceiving. And that's what that path that you see over here, the yellow dots, that's essentially your Swadhisthana. Now, the third one, now you can recognize very easily, is Vishuddha, which is what we are calling as Haridwar. And the path from Ujjaini to Haridwar is what is the space in between. Om Bhuh, Om Bhuvaha, Ogum Swaha, Om Mahaha. That is what it is, the Mahaloka. Om Janaha is what we have come up to. Okay, Haridwar. Then Om Tapaha. Now it takes a different route. It's no longer on the same straight line. And that's what Trigunatita is all about. So what has happened in this process is, when we have arrived at Mooladhara, it is Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, or we have begun to transform our laziness, procrastination, indolent nature into action. Then when we come to Ujjaini, we have reached the peak of action, and now we want to get into purity or a better realization of who we are, and that is Sat. You are Satya, or the truth. That transition is taking place through what is called as the Anahata Chakra, as you are familiar with at the heart. These 3 kumbhmélas which happen in Nashik, Ujjaini and Haridwar, I will tell you when a little later. But you're looking at transforming, first of all, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, that is your tamasic gunas to rajasic gunas. And then from Ujjaini to Haridwar, you're essentially trying to transform your rajasic gunas into sattvic gunas. But that's not all. We don't stop there, and that's where the turn takes place towards Prayagraj, which is Sahasrara. The path from Vishuddhi to Sahasrara is nothing but Agnya, as you know, which is the most important in a lot of spiritual practices. Bhru Madhye, as we call it. Bhru, of course, is the bro. You see, B-R-O-W. Many English words, as I said in the beginning, just like Will Durant, Sanskrit is the mother of all languages, including English. And that's what you see over here. Bhru Madhye, middle. Bro, middle is Bhru Madhye. And that is what you call as your third eye, the pituitary and pineal glands in the physical system. But in the subtle system, this is essentially your Agnya Chakra, where you get into a different kind of knowledge. And once you're there, you get onto the Sahasrara, because the Agnya is the peak of Sattva. Just like Manipura or Ujjaini is the peak of Rajas, and Nashik or Mooladhara is the peak of Tamas. Just crossing over to Rajas rajas, from tamas. Ujjaini is just crossing over from asatoma to sadgamaya, that is from rajasic gunas to sattvic gunas. Now at Haridwar, what is happening? In order to go to Prayagraj, which is the Sahasrara, you go even beyond the sattvic gunas of purity, which is trigunatita. All three gunas being transcended, all three qualities being transcended. People might think that's it, Sahasrara, and it's done. And all of this, remember, is happening through the Sushumna Nadi, which is not visible. Neither are the Ida and Pingala, but at least they are relatively grosser compared to the Sushumna, which is far more subtle. And now we come to what happens in Prayagraj. The Triveni Sangam of Ganga, Yamuna and Saraswati is nothing but Ida, Pingala and Sushumna, respectively. So Ganga is feminine, relatively well behaved compared to Yamuna, the dark one, which is a sister of Yama, the daughter of the sun, which is very, very turbulent. And because of its turbulence, it stirs up the river bed and the river banks, making it fairly dark. What we are talking about is not just people, but also rivers, because each of these are associated with a river. I already talked to you about Nashik being Godavari. On the banks of Godavari is where the kumbhmél is held in Nashik. When we come to Ujjain, where it is held is Kshipra, the river Kshipra. Many people think it's completely unassociated with Ganga. Well, my dear friends, it's the tributary of the tributary of the tributary of Ganga, because Kshipra goes and joins Chambal, Chambal goes and joins Yamuna, Yamuna goes and joins Ganga. This is what we call as tributaries. And at Triveni Sangam in Prayagraj, Ganga, Yamuna and Saraswati come together. Haridwar, of course, is the Ganga alone without the Yamuna or without the Kshipra. But now all of them have come together at Prayagraj, which is essentially transforming your sattva as well to Trigunatita. We already finished Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, in Tamas to Rajas, Asatoma Sadgamaya, in our transition from Rajas to Sattva. Mrityorma Mritangamaya is what is left, and which is what happens in Prayagraj en route to Varanasi, Kashi, which is the path to bāṃ-sa-béri-yā. Now at bāṃ-sa-béri-yā, what happens? No longer tributaries, but distributaries, because we're heading towards Ganga Sagar, and that's where the rivers Ganga, who has Hooghly, Kunti, and again Saraswati come out as three. So that's essentially what's happening when you're reaching bāṃ-sa-béri-yā, what I call as the Guru Gayatri Chakra. You might remember, those of you who have been following my videos, this is the 9th chakra, and the route from Prayagraj to bāṃ-sa-béri-yā, that once again you see it's pretty much a straight line all the way from Haridwar to bāṃ-sa-béri-yā via Prayagraj. This walking path that I have drawn, yellow path with black dots. Now that path is what we call as the Matru-Pitru, from Sahasrara to the Guru Gayatri. So this is what is the real kumbhmél cycle that is happening. I was talking to you about sadhanas, following the 112 techniques in the Vigyan Bhairav of Shiva. Now you're going to be talking about the next question, when it happens in Nashik, when it happens in Ujjaini, when it happens in Haridwar, when it happens in Prayagraj, when it happens in bāṃ-sa-béri-yā. Bāṃ-sa-béri-yā, why people don't know much about it, and very few people talk about it, except my great friend Shri Kanchan Banerjee and his wonderful wife Bhabi Hemanti Banerjee, who have been spearheading this and were even mentioned in a Man Ki Baat episode by Prime Minister Modi. So you had two of those in bāṃ-sa-béri-yā in recent times. But it's not a made-up thing. It was held till about 700 years ago. And as you know, we have been under the rule of invaders for a little more than a millennia, and it was stopped 700 years ago forcibly by the invading rulers. And now it has been revived. And that's very, very important. Many people don't realize that, because most people are coming here for various reasons, which we will look at when we look at the question when. So now let's look at when. When you look at when, it's important for us to, let me go back to the yellow color. Let me draw a square and you'll soon realize what it's for, and inscribe another square within it. Seems very familiar, like the inscriptions that we had in the koshas. No, but I'm doing something different. Some of you might have already realized that. What we're talking about over here is zodiac. So many of you would realize that this is essentially the 12 signs of the zodiac, starting with Aries or Mesha over here. And then you have, of course, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, which interestingly in Sanskrit is called kumbh, which is also the name for kumbhmél, and we will see why over there as well. And then we have finally Pisces. Many of you would have heard kumbhmél in Prayagraj, for example, takes place once in 12 years. Yes. And there's also an ardhkumbh which takes place right in between those two purna kumbhs or full kumbhs, which is ardhkumbh. And every year during the same period, it is māgh, okay, which is what bāṃ-sa-béri-yā is also having of late, and pretty much the other places as well. But the main kumbh, why it happens once in 12 years is that is approximately the duration it takes for Jupiter to transcribe the entire zodiac, to travel through the entire zodiac. If you look at even the period of Jupiter around the sun, it's about 11.8 Earth years. You see that there is a particular cycle associated. Do your sadhana to transform your tamas to rajas to sattva to trigunatita nrityorma-mrutangamaya. What you are essentially doing is in a repeated fashion, you are following certain practices which helps you not only intellectually know these things but also experientially experience this in a subjective fashion. Very difficult to share these in words with others, because when you're sharing it with others, there's some level of objectivity which is required. But unless and until you taste sugar, you will not know the sweetness of sugar, how much ever I describe it. Similar to that, this experience is in fact far, far more superior because it's beyond the senses of smell, taste, sight, touch, and sound. These are the pancha jnanendriyas which help us do that. So it's beyond the pancha bhutas, pancha jnanendriyas, and the pancha karmendriyas. We are talking about a metaphysical state. And so coming back, so it's a 12-year cycle. And if you do your sadhana for those 12 years, then you will see that you have actually experienced Aham Brahmasmi. Of course, you have to be dedicated, what we call as have bhakti towards it. Bhakti is not devotion to a particular deity necessarily, but to whatever task you're doing. In this case, the sadhana that you're doing. Whatever that sadhana is supposed to be, the way it's been transmitted from your guru to you, you continue to follow that for 12 years and you see the effect of it. In fact, the ardhkumbh is a significator of that. Even with 6 years of such a dedicated practice, total involvement, every cell of your body, physical body, will reverberate with this spiritual truth of Sat Chit Ananda, truth, existence, bliss. Jupiter, as I said, takes 12 years to go around, and there are 12 signs. So it takes approximately 1 year, 1 calendar year, from a Gregorian point of view, 365 days, or one cycle of the earth around the sun. 12 such cycles, actually 11.8. When it happens, then you have one full cycle, Jupiter coming back to its place. Currently, right now, Jupiter is in Taurus. So let me write Jupiter over here. The sun, on the other hand, takes 1 month in each zodiac sign. Jupiter takes 1 year in each zodiac sign. And therefore, 12 years to finish one entire zodiacal travel. Sun takes 12 months to do that. And moon takes 1 month to do that. In fact, the word month comes from the fact that it is the period of the moon around the earth. Similarly, the revolution of the earth around the sun gives rise to the name year, and the 12-year period is the revolution of Jupiter around the sun, or the zodiac equivalently in this particular case, because it's an outer planet. This particular configuration, this is when the kumbhmél happens in Prayagraj, when Jupiter is in Taurus, or what we call in Sanskrit as Rishabha Rashi. That is, Guru Brihaspati is in Rishabha Rashi. That fixes the year for us. Not a calendar year, but the year in which Jupiter is in Taurus. Within that year, we want to fix the months in which it takes place, for which we get to the sun, because as I said, sun spends about a month in each one of these zodiac signs. So right now, the sun is at the cusp over here between Sagittarius and Capricorn, and that crossover is what we celebrate as a wonderful festival all around Bharat as Pongal, Makara Sankranti, Bihu, Lori, etc. The name Makara Sankranti itself says it all, because it is Sankranti. Kranti is a revolution, and Sankranti is auspicious revolution, a sumptuous revolution, and it's a transition from one zodiac sign to another. So there are actually 12 Sankrantis throughout the year, but the one which is most popular the one in which the sun transits from Dhanur to Makara or Makara Sankranti, that is from Sagittarius to Capricorn. So that marks the beginning. But this particular time, we also have the Paush Purnima, or the moon exactly opposite to that tomorrow, that is Monday, January the 13th, 2025. And that opposition, exactly opposite to each other, the sun and the moon, is always a Purnima. 12, maybe sometimes 13 full moons in a year. Now that's happening in a nakshatra called Pushya in Cancer, after the moon transits from Gemini. That whole month is named as Paush, and therefore that name Paush Purnima. And it goes on all the way until Magh Purnima. Magh is because this is the Makha nakshatra over here, actually in Leo, the beginning of Leo, and the beginning of Aquarius, the sun is over there, and that's where the Magh Purnima happens. And this entire period is what we call as the kumbhmél in Prayagraj. Whatever configuration I've done is right now, which means that it is the beginning of the Prayagraj kumbhmél. This particular kumbhmél, you see Jupiter is in Taurus and the sun is in Capricorn. It will enter Aquarius after approximately 30-31 days, and then it will finally end beyond the Paurnami Mahashivaratri. About 45 days, and that 45-46 days is one full mandala, and that is the basic building block of a sadhana. So any sadhana that you take, the minimum that you have to do at least is for 46 days. And then of course I talked to you about 6 years, which is the ardhkumbh, and the 12 years, which is the purnakumbh. And if you do that, of course, you have attained mukti, moksha as a jivan mukta. In other words, while being alive, while still living in the physical body, you're experiencing the ultimate truth that you're not the physical body, mind, intellect, or even the vital life which is contained within it, but the vital life that is all around as well. So there's nowhere that you begin or end, because physical has to have boundaries, limits, whereas metaphysical, by its very nature, meta, beyond, does not have any boundaries, does not have any limits. It's infinite, both in space and time. And that, looked upon in another way, is everythingness or viṣṇū, and the reciprocal of that is nothingness or śivā, that which is not. So this is what is the configuration which leads to the Purnakumbh. What happens with the Ardhkumbh is that Jupiter in 6 years will come over here, and therefore you will have the Ardhkumbh at Prayagraj. Whereas what we are experiencing right now is the Purnakumbh at Prayagraj. This is the starting, and as I said, the moon goes around and comes back to meet where the sun is over there, and that's when you have the Mahashivaratri, close to the Mahashivaratri, where the end takes place. So sun will move up to over here. So that entire period, 46 days, we call as a mandala. 6 years from now, the Ardhkumbh will happen Prayagraj, just as it happened 6 years earlier, 2019, once again under the double engine sarkār of Yogi and Modi, and it was wonderful. Broke all records. Almost we had about 30 crore people, which is like 300 million, which is more than the population of most countries, gathering there. This time it's expected to be 40 to 45 crores, or in other words 400 to 450 million, which is much more than even the entire US population for that matter, or a large chunk of Europe. That's after 6 years. But even before that, when Jupiter goes to Leo, that is, it comes over here, there will be 2 kumbhs in Nashik and Ujjaini, because when Jupiter is in Leo and the sun is also in Leo, that's when Nashik kumbhmél happens. And the same year, or rather in a calendar year, it becomes a little later, because that happens in August of a particular year. So that's about 2-3 years from now it will happen, because Jupiter is at the cusp of Taurus and Gemini right now, so it may not be entire 3 years, so it might be a little less than that, maybe 2.5 years or so. You would have in August the Nashik kumbhmél, and then 8 months after that, when the sun comes to Aries and Jupiter is still over here, then you will have it in Ujjaini. So in other words, Nashik and Ujjaini kumbhmélas happen just in a matter of 8 months. This happens in August of one particular year. Immediate next year, April to May, you would have the one occurring in Ujjaini. Next, it takes one Ardhkumbh before it goes to a full kumbh, because then Jupiter transits to Aquarius after 6 more years, which means 9 years from now, and that's when it happens in Haridwar. And finally, again, after 3 more years, it will come back to Taurus, and you will have the Purnakumbh at Prayagraj. But this time is even more special. It's not only once in 12 years Purnakumbh, but what is called as the mahākumbh or mahāpurnakumbh, which means that 12 such cycles have already completed. And so since it's 12 years in one cycle of Jupiter, or what we call as the Jovian cycle period, is 12 Earth years, and therefore these are 144 Earth years. So it last happened in 1882, which is not exactly 144, 143 years, as I said, because it's not exactly 12 years, but 11.8 approximately. Therefore, it last happened in 1882, and I'm sure nobody watching this video would have been alive then or not born by then in this particular BMI or this particular physical body, but you would have been around as Atma anyways, as Paramatma, as Parabrahman. That is why this is so very special, and this 144 is actually the full lifespan of a human individual if we were to follow a lifestyle that is sattvic. With a sattvic lifestyle, you see that the Vimshottari Dasha is only 120 years. That's because giving room to external infections over which we do not have too much control, except that we can follow certain precautionary measures, safety like the mask, etc. But if that were also not to happen, if you're healthy, disease-free, then both, of course, physical health and emotional health, then what happens is you would have a total lifespan of 144 years. In fact, it's measured more in terms of the cycles of inhalation and exhalation, because that's prana in the grossest form. So that takes care of the when of each one of these places. So as I said, over here it's Prayagraj. Once it comes here, it is, as I said, Nashik and Ujjaini or Avantika. And then I'm talking of Jupiter's location. And when Jupiter comes to Aquarius, you have it in Haridwar. So you cover all these four places. What about bāṃ-sa-béri-yā? That happens, as I said, typical to the Māgh Mela. It happens every year, and that's essentially a totally different thing, because here in Prayagraj, you're talking of tributaries coming together. There you're talking of distributaries going away from each other. And essentially, one is about nothingness, the other is about everythingness. But now what is the parallel to that? In order to understand that, I have penned a poem and very bravely have sung it as well, which you will listen to at the end of this video, but I would like to explain its meaning as of now, which is what we will go into doing next. This is what it looks like in Sanskrit, and since many of you might not know the Devanagari script, I will instead talk to you about it in English. I want you to see what I'm showing over here is in terms of the analogy. Sanātana dharma and the kumbhmél in particular is all about metaphors, is all about figurative way of speaking, dialectical culture that we have, analogies, mnemonics. So in that sense, you see in my song, you will see that Ganga is synonymous with Ida. So here is the 1:1 correspondence in what I was talking to you about as the conformal mapping. So that is the feminine nature, which is towards the left side of our body. It's also called as the Chandranadi, because the moon is supposed to take care of the liquid in the kalash or kumbh, which is the amrit, not spilling over. I already told you that liquid is nothing but the Parabrahman. So the Parabrahman not spilling over. It might look funny, but you will experience it when you do your sadhana. Whatever your sadhana is, no specific sadhana is required. Whatever sadhana has been taught to you by the Guru or the Jagat Guru, the nature itself, or through your own past lives, you have acquired that knowledge and you're following a certain sadhana. If you practice it well, you will see this happening. And similarly, there is a masculine nature, which is what is the 1:1 correspondence between Yamuna and the Pingala, which is also called as the Suryanadi. So this is called as the Chandranadi, associated with the moon, and this is the Pingala or the Suryanadi, which is associated with the sun, and it's masculine. So this is feminine, while this is masculine in nature. We're not talking of female and male. It's the feminine and masculine characteristics within each individual, within each human being, irrespective of what your physical gender might be or what you would like to identify with, which is important in these days, becoming more and more important. The next thing is the mystical aspect. Mystical aspect is Saraswati because it cannot be seen with physical eyes, at least not anymore. But you would see a distinct color that is happening at the junction or the Triveni Sangam, and that's because of Saraswati. Of course, you have Yamuna, which is dark, and Ganga, which is relatively whiter in terms of the froth that that you get, the waves that you see because of its motion. On the other hand, Saraswati, you don't know from a physical aspect what it is, but that's essentially your Sushumna. And that subtlety is what I talked to you about. Concentrically, if you look at the Sushumna, which is right at the center of the spinal cord in the subtle body, not in the physical, it is actually made out of concentric nadis within itself. So the Sushumna nadi consists of the Vajra nadi. Vajra means diamond, very strong. And within that you have the Chitra nadi, and within that, even more subtle, the Brahma nadi, which goes all the way to the Brahmarandhra and above to the Matrupitru and the Guru Gayatri chakras. So that's the Triveni Sangam that we are talking about. So this is of course beyond any feminine or masculine. Just like if you call this Ida as Chandranadi and Pingala as Surya Nadi, Sushumna is also called as the Brihaspati Nadi. Brihaspati is nothing but Guru or Jupiter. This is the Chandranadi, Surya Nadi and the Guru Nadi. Here you have the three. Again you see, three is a Sanskrit prefix meaning three, the number three, and that's what you call it in English as well. So another example, you can see thousands, literally thousands of such examples. Could probably make an entire very long video on that. Anyway, that's for another day. What we're talking about is three rivers over here, and we're talking of three nadis over here. In fact, there are 72,000 nadis, including all your subtle nerves and subtle arteries and subtle veins, etc. But what we are interested more is in the three primary ones which are of significance to a yogi. Those are the Ida, Pingala and the Sushumna, what we call as the Chandra Nadi, the Surya Nadi and the Guru Nadi respectively. And they have a 1:1 analogy with Ganga, Yamuna and Saraswati. Whereas there we are talking of Veni, here we are talking of chakras. We are talking of rivers there, here we are talking of the points at which these meeting takes place. Once again, a Sangam. And those crossovers that are happening at each one of these intersection points, which is what we call as the chakras, remember, all the way from Muladhara to Sahasrara, after which it becomes what we call as the distributaries. Next thing that I talk about over here is 1:1 correspondence between the places at which the kumbhmél happens. Namely, as I said, starts off with Nashik. In the same year, it goes to Avantika or Ujjain. Then it goes to Haridwara after 6 years. And after 6 more years, it goes to Prayagraj. That's a Hindi word, but Sanskrit we call it Prayagraj, like we say Haridwar instead of Haridwar. Again, there is a 1:1 correspondence between what happens outside and inside. In fact, what happens inside is a far more greater experiential truth, because that's what you really live, and what you see outside through your physical eyes, which are far less effective. As you know, you can see only a very small spectrum of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Similarly, 20 hertz to 20,000 or 20 kilohertz, that is what is heard by the human ears functioning normally, whereas sounds can be below 20 hertz and above 20 kilohertz as well. We have limitations in these physical senses, but in the metaphysical way of knowing, what we call as intuition, or tuition, of course, learning, intuition is what is happening in the interior, and that's by going deeper and deeper inside. So what is the 1:1 correspondence? I already described to you on the map. I'm just showing it to you over here. Nashik is associated with Muladhara. Avantika or Ujjaini is associated with Manipura. The distance between them, because this is Bhu and this is Suva, and in between the path is Bhuvahaloka, or the space in between the Bhuloka and the Swargaloka, which is Nashik and Avantika or Muladhara and Manipura respectively, which is that space is Bhuvas. We call it Bhuvaloka. It's also route from Nashik to Avantika, from the Triambakeshwar to the Mahakaleshwara. Then, of course, it is Swadhisthana within our body. Next, we have Haridwara. The analogy within our body is Vishuddha. And finally, you have Prayagraj, which is associated with Sahasrara. This is 1:1 correspondence for these 4 traditional places as we know. But one more traditional place which lost or had a break of around 700 years in the tradition is the West Bengal town of bāṃ-sa-béri-yā, where Kunti, Saraswati and Hooghly or Ganga get together, or rather separate out from each other, and that is associated with the topmost chakra beyond even the Sahasrara and Matrupitru to the Guru Gayatri. That's a 1:1 correspondence there as well. You will see in my song. And finally, we are also talking about the kind of melas. I told you that this is Māgh Mela happens once a year, 1 per annum, whereas ardhkumbh is 1 per 6 years. That is the ardhkumbh kumbhmél. Then the Purna Kumbhmela happens once in 12 years. Very popular in Haridwar and especially Prayagraj. And what we are experiencing now is the Mahapurna Kumbhmela, or just Mahākumbh in short, which is once in approximately 143 to 144 years. This also could be 12 years to 11 years approximately, depending of course on the small difference between 12 and the actual period of Jupiter in terms of Earth years. I think the rest of it is kind of self-explanatory, so I will not go into explaining the rest of the poem or song that I've written. Let you enjoy listening to it, and do get back to me through your feedback as always through WhatsApp, LinkedIn messages, or Facebook, YouTube itself through comments, etc. Threads, or which part of Instagram, as some of you might know already, especially the youngsters, very popular with them. And then of course X, Elon Musk, way to go, January 20th, looking forward to the Trump government inauguration. So these 46 days are wonderful. If you can go, you might as well go, which will be really nice. But if you can't go, at least I would suggest that you experience this internally within yourself, because this is where, as you know, you start from the Patala, which is at the feet, then you go to what is known as Mahatala, then Talatala, then you go to Rasatala, Sutala, Vitala, Athala, and then the Mooladhara. So once you come to the Mooladhara, then you have Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddhi, Agnya, Sahasrara. Then you have the Matrupitru and the Guru Gayatri. Experience Nashik over here, experience Ujjaini or Avantika over here, experience Haridwar over here, and right now, this 46-day period, experience Prayagraj, which was unfortunately called Allahabad for a long time. In fact, the Mughal names of Shahi Snan has been restored back to the traditional Sanskrit Amrut Snan, and Peshwai, which is the entry of the akhadas into the town, has also been renamed, as you would see over here. The kumbhāṣṭakam, an 8-stanza poem exclusively penned, bravely sung, and inclusively explained for the first time ever to commemorate the culmination of a 143, approximately 144 year long wait from 1882 to 2025, launching kumbhāṣṭakam, internal yogic kumbhmela, projected out spiritually, scientifically, and astrologically. The Sahitya, Gana, and Bhashya, of course, by yours truly. I hope you like this Mahakumbh special. What I was mentioning earlier was Amrit Snan, and the term Peshwai has become Nagar Pravesh because we are entering that Nagar. And again, these are very, very profound internal meanings as well. How we are doing the Pravesha, the life within the Sushumna, Ida or Pingala, how the life comes in and how it goes off during death. But in between what happens, the transition is far more important in terms of the refinement of the Kundalini energy, which is also synonymous in this case with Parabrahman or the Amrut that is there, and which takes you all the way up there. May this video inspire a lot of you to deepen and make your sadhana more regular. Not only deepen your sadhana, but also make it more regular so that you will see the difference and take advantage of this 46-day period. Because when you go there, they said that Ganga washes off the sins of many people. Once again, it's a metaphorical statement. But when Ganga itself needs to get rid of its sins, that's when the Naga Bhabas and many other great sadhus who have dedicated their entire lives to spirituality come and take a dip. The energization of the water is phenomenal. You know, there will be a lot of studies around the world, including a great Japanese scientist who's done a lot of research on how emotions affect water structure. It's still H2O, 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen, but how the molecules arrange themselves with respect to each other makes a huge difference in terms of what kind of environment and emotions they are exposed to. And especially when discussions of knowledge in satsangs happens, jnana and vijnana can greatly affect the structure. And just taking a holy dip either on Mauni Amavasya or on that is right in between, that is the peak, that's the best if you can, because just on that particular day you might have as many as 4 or 5 crore people coming in. Those who are having a phobia towards crowds don't go, but these are not crowds in the real sense that we see in a traffic jam or some other places. You're waiting in long lines, etc., or unruly crowds. Here you're talking of everybody, or at least most of the people there, are into spirituality, and therefore they are beyond their physical identification, and therefore it's really not a crowd but a fantastic opportunity to mingle with what you really are, Parabrahman, because what they really are is also Parabrahman. So as one single Parabrahman, how can one be a crowd? As Rajnikant would say, Panniguda Kootam Kootamavarum, Singa Epame, Singalada. With this, I end the Bhashyam or the Karika about the poem. I let you listen to it now. Namaste.
Gange Yamune Saraswati Trivenyaha Sangame Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ida Pingala Sushumna Trinadi Chakra Sangame Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Nashikavantika Haridvara Prayagraja bāṃ-sa-béri-yā Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Mūladhara Manipura Vishuddha Sahasrara Guru Gayatri Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Māgh ardhkumbh Purna kumbhmél mahākumbh Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Prayagetu Mahādeva Yajñam Yajñapatir-yayau Tatra pashyat swayam Brahma Tirtharajam Jagadgurum Gange cha Yamune chaiva Chambal Shipra Yukta Veni Godavari Kunti Saraswati Mukta Veni Jalesmin Sannidhim Kuru Triveni Sangame Punye Ganga Yamunayoha Sada Snanam Krutva Tuyaha Kaschit Sarva Papaihi Pramuchyate Shri Gayatri Mahamantra Darshita Brahma Rishi Vishwamitra Gotra Dinesh Kumara Harachita Iti Harur Sampadrishta kumbhāṣṭakam